Rain had a way of making invisible people disappear even further. It washed them into the shadows, dissolved their edges, turned them into nothing more than wet shapes pressed against brick walls and rusted metal. In Bakersfield, California, on a freezing November night, the rain came down in sheets that blurred the harsh glow of streetlights and turned the asphalt into a black mirror, reflecting a world that had no place for boys like Finn Mercer, 17 years old, 132 pounds soaking wet, alone. The gap between the industrial dumpster and the crumbling brick wall behind the Iron Horse Roadhouse was exactly 23 inches wide. Finn had measured it with his body 100 times over the past 4 months. 23 inches was just enough space for a starving teenager to wedge himself into, just enough to block the wind that came screaming off Interstate 5 like a living thing with teeth and claws. The dumpster smelled like rotting food and diesel fuel. The exhaust vent from the Roadhouse kitchen would occasionally cough out a cloud of warm, grease-scented air that made Finn's stomach twist into knots. It had been 3 days since he'd eaten anything solid. 3 days of drinking water from gas station bathroom sinks and chewing on stolen packets of ketchup just to trick his body into thinking it was getting something, anything to keep the machine running. His mother used to say hunger was just your body's way of reminding you that you were still alive. Claire Mercer had said a lot of things before she died. Finn pulled his threadbare jacket tighter around his chest. The fabric was so thin now it barely qualified as clothing anymore, more like a memory of warmth, a ghost of protection. His arms wrapped around his knees, trying to conserve what little heat his body still produced. The shivering had become constant now, not the occasional shudder, but a deep, bone-rattling tremor that never stopped. His teeth chattered so hard his jaw ached. Hypothermia didn't announce itself with trumpets and fanfare. It crept in like a thief. First the shivering, then the confusion, then the deadly seductive warmth that made you want to lie down and sleep forever. Finn knew the signs. He'd watched a man die from exposure last winter in Reno, right before he ran from the foster home. The man had been smiling at the end, peaceful, like he was finally going somewhere better. The parking lot of the Iron Horse Roadhouse stretched out before him like a stage. Harsh fluorescent lights mounted on tall poles cast everything in a sickly yellow glow. A few big rigs sat idling in the back section, their engines rumbling low and steady clouds of exhaust rising into the rain. 2 beat-up sedans, a rusted pickup truck with a missing tailgate, and motorcycles. Always motorcycles. The Iron Horse wasn't a family restaurant. It wasn't the kind of place you took your kids for pancakes on Sunday morning. It was a gritty, neon-lit oasis for long-haul truckers who needed coffee at 3 in the morning, insomniacs looking for company, and bikers who treated the place like a second home. Specifically, it was Hell's Angels territory. Finn had learned to read patches the way other kids learned to read street signs. The winged death's head, the MC rocker, the bottom rocker that told you which charter a man belonged to. Bakersfield, Oakland, Fresno. Sometimes riders came through from as far as Nevada or Arizona, but the Bakersfield charter owned this ground. Their president was a man named Magnus Blackwell. Everyone called him Reaper. 6'5", 280 pounds of muscle scar tissue and absolute authority. Norwegian heritage blonde beard braided like some ancient Viking warrior. Eyes the color of glacial ice that could freeze your blood from across a parking lot. Finn had watched him from the shadows for months now. Watched the way other men deferred to him. The way they stood straighter when he was near. The way they would literally lay down their lives if he asked. Magnus Blackwell didn't ask for respect. He commanded it by simply existing. His wife was Cassandra. Everyone called her Cass. Late 40s blonde hair usually pulled back into a no-nonsense ponytail, sharp black leather jacket eyes that missed nothing. She carried herself like a woman who had fought her way up from nothing and refused to apologize for the scars she'd collected along the way. The club had a vice president named Garrett Sloan. Smooth talker, dark hair slicked back, expensive boots, the kind of man who smiled with his mouth but never with his eyes. Finn didn't trust him, though he couldn't have explained why. Just instinct. The same instinct that had kept him alive on the streets for 13 months. There was Axel, the sergeant-at-arms, faced like a roadmap of old violence. German descent, loyal to the bone. When Axel gave an order, men moved. And Doc Rafferty, the club medic. Irish-American graying red hair, hands that could set bones and stitch wounds while carrying on a conversation about the weather. He'd been a combat medic somewhere overseas. Iraq, maybe. Afghanistan. Finn had never asked. These men fascinated him, terrified him, drew him in like gravity. They had something Finn had never known. Brotherhood, family, a code that meant something. They looked out for each other, protected each other, would go to war for each other without hesitation. Finn Mercer had no one. His mother was 6 years dead, beaten to death by her boyfriend in a cramped apartment in Sacramento, while 11-year-old Finn hid in a closet and called 911 on a phone that the man ripped out of the wall before the call could connect. Finn had run, sprinted out the back door while his mother screamed for him to go, "Baby, go run, and don't look back." He'd hidden behind a dumpster 3 blocks away for 2 hours before he found the courage to return. By then, the police were already there. Yellow tape, red and blue lights, a black bag being wheeled out on a gurney. Claire Mercer, age 31, cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head. Finn had spent the next 6 years being shuffled through the foster care system. 3 different homes, 3 different versions of hell. The last one in Reno had been run by a man named Lloyd Perkins. Lloyd believed in discipline, hard work, tough love, which meant he believed in locking kids in the basement without food when they stepped out of line, which meant he believed in using his belt for more than just holding up his pants. 13 months ago, Finn had run, stolen $40 from Lloyd's wallet, hitchhiked to Bakersfield, and learned how to survive by becoming invisible. Being invisible meant people looked right through you. Their eyes would slide off your dirty clothes and unwashed hair like you were a glitch in their reality. A ghost. Something not quite real enough to acknowledge. Finn had gotten good at being a ghost. He watched the roadhouse entrance. It was past 2 in the morning now. The overnight crowd. A trucker walked out carrying a styrofoam cup of coffee collar turned up against the rain. He climbed into his rig without so much as glancing in Finn's direction. Invisible. Pete, the night cook, was working tonight. Finn could see him through the kitchen window, a broad-shouldered man in his 60s with a white apron and a permanent scowl. Pete was the only person in Bakersfield who had shown Finn any kindness. Sometimes when the manager wasn't looking, Pete would scrape leftover food into a takeout container and leave it by the back door near the dumpster. Cold fries, half a burger, pancakes that had sat under a heat lamp too long. It wasn't much, but it kept Finn alive. 3 days ago, the manager had caught Pete doing it, threatened to fire him if he kept feeding strays. Pete had argued. The manager had won. Now the back door stayed locked, and Finn's stomach had started eating itself from the inside out. The cold was getting worse. Finn's fingers had gone numb an hour ago. His toes felt like blocks of ice inside his worn-out sneakers. The shivering had progressed to the point where it felt like his bones were trying to shake themselves apart. He thought about his mother, the way she used to sing while she cooked dinner, off-key but warm, full of love. She'd had a hard life, worked 3 jobs to keep them in that tiny apartment. Waitress in the morning, cleaning offices at night, weekends, at a laundromat folding other people's clothes. She'd been so tired all the time. Then she'd met him, the boyfriend. Travis, charming at first, helpful, fixed things around the apartment, brought groceries, made Claire laugh for the first time in years. Then the first slap came. Then the apologies. Then the promises it would never happen again. Then another slap, harder. Then the closed fists. Then the systematic destruction of a woman who just wanted someone to love her. Finn had been too small to stop it, too young, too weak. He hated himself for that weakness. 11 years old and hiding while his mother bled out on the kitchen floor. Some son, some protector. That guilt lived in his chest like a second heart, pumping shame through his veins instead of blood. A pair of headlights cut through the rain, turning into the parking lot. Finn pressed himself deeper into the gap between the dumpster and the wall. Old habit, stay hidden, stay safe. But this wasn't a truck. This was a pristine black Cadillac Escalade moving smooth and quiet like a predator. It parked directly under one of the flickering streetlights near the roadhouse's side entrance. The engine cut off. The driver's door opened. Cassandra Blackwell stepped out. Even from 40 feet away, Finn could see the difference. This wasn't a casual stop for coffee. Cass moved with purpose. She wore a sharp black leather jacket over a dark turtleneck, her blonde hair pulled back tight. Her posture was straight shoulders, square eyes, scanning the parking lot with the practiced caution of someone who expected trouble. She reached back into the Escalade and pulled out a silver Halliburton briefcase, heavy from the way she carried it. Important. Finn noticed the small red and white pin on her lapel, the 81 support patch. Hell's Angels royalty, Magnus Blackwell's wife. The woman who helped run the club's legitimate business operations while her husband managed the Brotherhood. But something was wrong. Cass usually traveled with protection. Always. Finn had watched her come and go from the roadhouse dozens of times over the past months. There were always at least 2 bikes escorting her, sometimes Axel, sometimes other senior members. She never moved alone. Tonight she was alone. Finn's instincts screamed, the same survival instincts that had kept him breathing for 13 months on the street. The same animal awareness that made him notice when someone was watching him, when danger was close, when something didn't fit the pattern. This didn't fit. Cass closed the Escalade's door and turned toward the roadhouse entrance, the briefcase in her left hand. Her right hand stayed near the pocket of her jacket. Ready. Then Finn saw it. A dark gray Dodge Charger, headlights off, rolling silently into the parking lot from the access road. It didn't move like a car looking for a parking spot. It moved like something hunting. Deliberate, calculated, predatory. The Charger glided to a stop about 40 feet from the Escalade, positioning itself to block any exit. 2 men stepped out. They wore dark raincoats and black baseball caps pulled low over their faces. They didn't speak. They didn't look toward the brightly lit roadhouse windows where witnesses might see. They moved with terrifying, synchronized purpose directly toward Cassandra Blackwell. Cass turned, saw them instantly. Her hand dropped smoothly toward her jacket pocket, her face hardening into a mask of pure defiance. She wasn't a civilian caught off guard. She was a woman who lived in a dangerous world and expected exactly this kind of trouble. But she was outmatched. The man on the right raised his hand. Even through the driving rain and the sickly yellow glow of the streetlight, Finn could see the weapon. A handgun with a long, cylindrical suppressor attached to the barrel. Matte black finish. Professional grade. This wasn't a robbery. This was an execution. The shooter planted his feet. Military bearing. Trained. Calm. He aimed center mass at Cass's chest. Cass drew a compact pistol from her pocket, but she was a split second too slow. The shooter had the advantage, had the angle, had the drop on her. Finn's heart hammered against his ribs so hard he thought it might crack through his sternum. Every survival instinct he possessed told him to press himself deeper into the shadows, to close his eyes, to cover his ears, to let this nightmare play out and pretend he had never seen it. If he interfered, he would die. These were professional killers. He was a starving 17-year-old kid with no family, no friends, and a body so weak from malnutrition that he could barely stand without getting dizzy. The shooter's finger tightened on the trigger, and Finn saw his mother. Saw her cornered in their cramped apartment kitchen, blood running from her split lip, eyes wide with terror, looking directly at 11-year-old Finn hiding behind the refrigerator. Her eyes had said everything her voice couldn't. Run, baby. Run and don't look back. Save yourself. So he had run, and she had died. Alone, terrified, in pain. Finn had run then because he was a child, small, powerless, terrified. He was still small, still powerless, still terrified. But he wasn't 11 anymore, and he wasn't going to watch another woman die in front of him. Not again. Not ever again. Beside the dumpster, half buried in the weeds and trash, lay a solid steel tire iron. 3 feet long, heavy, cold. Finn grabbed it. The weight of it in his hands grounded him, made the decision real, irreversible. Before his conscious mind could overrule his body, before fear could freeze him in place, before common sense could tell him this was suicide, Finn bolted from the shadows. He didn't yell. A yell would give him away. Alert the shooter, get him killed before he could close the distance. He ran, 30 feet between the dumpster and the shooters. His worn-out sneakers slapped against the wet pavement. Rain hammered his face. His lungs burned. His legs threatened to give out beneath him. 3 days without food meant 3 days without fuel. His body was running on fumes and adrenaline and pure desperate courage. The shooter had his eye fixed down the sights of the suppressed weapon, entirely focused on Cassandra Blackwell. He never saw the dripping, wet, skeletal teenager hurtling toward him from the darkness like a ghost manifesting into flesh. Finn swung the tire iron with every ounce of strength left in his emaciated body. He aimed for the shooter's extended arm, the one holding the gun, the one about to end Cassandra Blackwell's life. The heavy steel connected with a sickening crack of shattering bone. The weapon discharged at the exact moment of impact. The suppressor swallowed most of the explosive roar, reducing the gunshot to a sharp metallic snap. But the bullet knocked off its deadly trajectory by Finn's strike missed Cass's heart, missed her lung, grazed her left shoulder instead, tearing through the leather jacket and carving a burning line across her flesh. Cass stumbled backward against the Escalade, gasping in pain. The briefcase dropped to the ground with a heavy metallic thud. Blood began seeping through the torn leather of her jacket, dark and wet. The shooter shrieked, a high animal sound of agony. The suppressed pistol clattered to the asphalt as his right arm bent at a horrific, unnatural angle. Compound fracture, bone fragments visible through torn skin. He collapsed to his knees, cradling the destroyed limb face, contorted in shock and pain. The second man, caught completely off guard by the sudden interference, reacted with brutal efficiency. He was massive, 6'4", easily 240 pounds. He lunged at Finn with the kind of speed that only came from years of training and violence. His fist came around in a haymaker that had all of his considerable weight behind it. The impact caught Finn on the side of his head like a sledgehammer. Finn's vision exploded into cascading white stars. The world tilted sideways. Sound became muffled, distant, like he was underwater. The force of the blow lifted him completely off his feet and sent him crashing onto the unforgiving asphalt. He hit the ground hard. His ribs, already weak from malnutrition, cracked under the impact. 3 of them, sharp, stabbing pain that made it impossible to breathe. He skidded across the wet pavement, his hands tearing open on the rough surface, the tire iron clattering away into the darkness. Kill the kid. Get the case. The words came from far away, through water, through fog. Finn tried to push himself up. His arms wouldn't cooperate. His head swam with dizziness and nausea. Blood poured from a gash above his eyebrow, running into his left eye, blinding him. He could taste copper and salt. Rain mixed with blood, cold seeped into his bones. This was how he was going to die. Alone on wet asphalt, in a roadhouse parking lot, beaten to death by a professional killer for the crime of trying to save someone. At least he tried this time. At least he didn't run. At least his mother would be proud. Footsteps approached, heavy boots on pavement. The second man loomed over him, reaching inside his coat, drawing something. A hunting knife, jagged blade, serrated edge designed to cause maximum damage. The man stepped over his injured partner, advancing on Finn with the calm, methodical purpose of someone who had killed before and would sleep just fine afterward. Finn struggled to push himself up, his head swimming, his ribs screaming, blood blinding him. "Hey!" The voice cracked like a whip across the parking lot. The man with the knife stopped, turned. Cassandra Blackwell was leaning against her Escalade. She hadn't collapsed, hadn't run, hadn't called for help and hidden like a civilian. She had leveled her compact pistol with a steady, unwavering hand, aiming straight at the second attacker's face. Blood seeped through the sleeve of her jacket, dark and wet, dripping onto the asphalt. But her gaze was cold, calculating, completely void of fear. "You take one more step toward that boy," Cass said, her voice deadly calm, "and I'll put a hollow point through your left eye." The attacker froze, looked at the pistol, looked at his partner, groaning on the ground, cradling his shattered arm. They had lost the element of surprise, lost the advantage. The gunshot, though suppressed, had drawn attention. The back door of the roadhouse burst open. Pete the cook stood in the doorway, wearing his white apron, staring out into the rain with wide eyes. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Maybe a coincidence. Maybe a passing patrol car responding to something else entirely. But the killers couldn't afford to find out. "This ain't over," the second attacker spat. The words came out tight with rage and pain. He grabbed his partner by the collar of his raincoat, hauling him to his feet. The injured shooter whimpered, his destroyed arm dangling uselessly. They scrambled toward the Dodge Charger, moving fast despite the injuries. The Charger's engine roared to life. Tires screamed on wet pavement, spinning for purchase. The car shot backward, executed a sloppy J-turn that sent water spraying in all directions, and tore off into the night. Headlights flicked on only after it was 2 blocks away, disappearing into the rain and darkness like it had never existed. Finn lay on the asphalt. Rain washed the blood from his face, mixing with the oil and grime and runoff, carrying everything away into the gutters. His chest heaved. Every breath sent sharp, stabbing pains through his broken ribs. He felt cold, so incredibly cold, colder than he'd ever been in his life. He tried to crawl back toward the shadows, back to the safety of the dumpster, back to invisibility. Footsteps approached, soft, steady. Cassandra Blackwell knelt beside him on the wet ground. She didn't care about the mud ruining her pants, didn't care about the blood dripping from her arm. She gently placed a warm hand on Finn's cheek, stopping his desperate attempt to crawl away. "Don't move, sweetheart, don't move." The hardness in her expression had vanished, replaced by an intense, overwhelming maternal concern. She looked at his bruised, hollow cheeks, his ragged clothes, the bleeding gash on his head, the way his body shook with cold and shock and broken ribs. "You saved my life." Finn choked out words through chattering teeth. "I have to go. Cops. I can't do cops." "No cops," Cass promised. Her voice was firm. "Absolute. I swear to you. But you need help." With her uninjured arm, she pulled a sleek smartphone from her pocket. She dialed a number, holding the phone to her ear while keeping her focus locked on Finn. The line connected. Cass's entire tone changed. Urgent, commanding, but carrying a tremor of adrenaline underneath. "Magnus, it's me. I'm at the Iron Horse." They made a move for the case. A roaring voice erupted from the other end of the line. Deep, furious, loud enough that Finn could hear it even through the rain. "Yeah, I'm hit," Cass continued, "but it's a graze. I'm okay." The voice on the other end got louder, angrier. "Listen to me, Magnus. Shut up and listen." Cass barked the words with enough authority to cut through even her husband's rage. "I'm alive because of a kid. A homeless kid out here in the lot. He took out the shooter with a tire iron. The kid is hurt bad." Silence on the other end of the line. Heavy. Processing. "Don't call an ambulance," Cass instructed. Her voice dropped lower, colder. "Bring Doc. Bring Axel. Bring the club." Another pause. "Someone knew exactly where I'd be tonight, Magnus. Someone knew I'd be alone." "We have a rat." She hung up, looked back down at Finn. shrugged off her thick leather jacket, wincing as the fabric pulled against her bleeding shoulder. She draped it over Finn's shivering body. The jacket was heavy, warm. It smelled of worn leather and tobacco and expensive perfume. It trapped what little heat his body had left. "What's your name, Kid Finn?" He could barely get the word out. His eyes were heavy, so heavy. All he wanted was to sleep. Finn. Cass repeated his name like she was committing it to memory, to something sacred. "My name is Cassandra. Cassandra Blackwell. You just picked a fight with some very bad people, Finn. But you also just made the most powerful friends in this state. Hang on, just hang on." Time became strange, elastic. Finn drifted in and out of consciousness. Pete came out from the roadhouse with a first aid kit and a pile of clean towels. He pressed one against Cass's shoulder, another against the gash on Finn's head. Asked questions, got short answers, kept looking at Finn like he was seeing him for the first time. Cass refused to leave Finn's side. She sat on the wet pavement holding his hand, ignoring her own bleeding wound. Finn wanted to sleep. The pain was fading into a dull, freezing numbness. His body was shutting down, giving up. Hypothermia's final gift. The peaceful surrender. Then he heard it. Not thunder, something else. It started as a low, deep vibration in the earth. A sound you felt in your chest before your ears registered it. The kind of rumble that came from something massive, something powerful, something primal. The vibration grew, intensified, became a sustained, deafening roar that drowned out the sound of the storm. Finn forced his eyes open. Headlights, dozens of them, then hundreds. They poured off the Interstate 5 exit ramp like a river of light flooding the dark access road. Not a few bikes, not a small group. An armada, a tidal wave. The unmistakable rhythmic thunder of hundreds of V-twin engines drowned out everything else. The rain, the wind, the world. They swarmed the parking lot of the Iron Horse Roadhouse like an invading army. A flood of chrome and steel and leather. They blocked the entrances, shut down the street, formed an impenetrable perimeter. 800 motorcycles, maybe more. An entire army mobilized in the dead of night for one woman and one broken runaway. The riders killed their engines almost simultaneously. The sudden silence that followed the deafening roar was somehow more terrifying than the noise had been. 800 men, standing in the rain, waiting. At the center of the pack, a massive figure dismounted from a custom blacked-out road glide. Magnus Blackwell, 6'5", 280 pounds of muscle and violence. His blonde beard was braided in the Old Norse style. His gaze was the color of glacial ice. He wore a heavy vest with the president patch over his heart and the blazing Hell's Angels death's head on his back. He walked through the parting sea of riders with the heavy, deliberate steps of a warlord surveying a battlefield. The rain seemed to avoid him, bouncing off his broad shoulders like even the weather knew better than to challenge this man. Those winter blue eyes locked onto the scene beneath the flickering streetlight, the blood pooling on the wet asphalt, his wife bleeding sitting on the ground, the small broken boy wrapped in her jacket, a muscle feathered in Magnus Blackwell's jaw, the only outward sign of the volcanic rage building beneath his controlled exterior. Behind him, 800 bikers stood in perfect, terrifying silence. They were waiting for a single word, a single gesture, one command from their president to unleash absolute hell on the city of Bakersfield. Cass. Magnus's voice was a low rumble that carried over the storm despite his quiet volume. He closed the final few yards to his wife. His massive hands reached out gentle despite their size. But Cass didn't fall into his arms weeping. She wasn't that kind of woman. She met his stare squarely. Unbroken. "I'm fine, Magnus. It's a graze. But we have a situation." Magnus's attention shifted from his wife's bleeding shoulder to the crumpled, emaciated figure lying on the ground, wrapped in Cass's oversized jacket. "The kid. His name is Finn." Cass's voice was fierce, protective. Two hitters in a gray Charger tried to take my head off and grab the case. They had me dead to rights, Magnus, dead. This starving, freezing boy came out of nowhere and shattered the shooter's arm with a tire iron. He took a beating for it. Magnus knelt beside Finn. Up close, the boy looked even smaller. His face was a canvas of dark bruises and deep lacerations. His breathing was shallow, rattling. His lips were turning blue. Magnus had seen hard men broken by less. For a street kid to step between a Hells Angel's wife and a suppressed weapon took a kind of insane courage that money couldn't buy and threats couldn't manufacture. Doc. Magnus bellowed the word over his shoulder. A tall, wiry man with graying red hair and a heavy canvas duffel bag shoved his way through the crowd. Doc Rafferty didn't ask questions. He just dropped to his knees, snapped on a pair of black nitrile gloves, and went to work. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking pulse, checking pupils with a pen light, palpating ribs, assessing the head wound. Pulse is weak, thready, pupils are sluggish. He's got a severe concussion, 2 maybe 3 cracked ribs, and he's suffering from acute hypothermia and malnutrition. His body is shutting down, boss. We need him in a warm, sterile environment 10 minutes ago. Bring the chase van up, now. Magnus stood, turning his attention back to his wife. The case safe Cass nodded toward the silver Halliburton, still sitting in the rain where she dropped it. But Magnus, they knew exactly when I was making this run. They knew I'd be alone. This wasn't random. This was a targeted strike. Magnus's expression darkened, turning as hard and cold as obsidian. The briefcase contained financial documents, encrypted drives, offshore routing numbers, the club's transition into legitimate commercial real estate. If a rival syndicate got hold of it, they could dismantle the Bakersfield Charter's financial future overnight. Only 3 people in the entire world knew Cass was moving those drives tonight. Magnus, Cass, and the club's vice president, Garrett Sloan. A heavy, suffocating tension settled over the parking lot. Axel. Magnus said the name quietly, almost gently, which made it more terrifying than if he'd shouted. A mountain of a man with a scarred face stepped forward from the ranks. Axel, sergeant-at-arms, the man responsible for the club's discipline and security. Get the security tapes from the roadhouse. I want the plates on that gray Charger. Put the word out to every tow truck driver, every chop shop, and every street corner in this county. I want those 2 hitters found before sunrise. Axel nodded once. Sharp, efficient. And Axel, yeah, boss, Garrett Sloan didn't show up to church meeting tonight. Set his bike through a rod. Magnus's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. Find Garrett. Bring him to the clubhouse. Do not let him speak to anyone. Done. As Doc and 2 other angels carefully lifted Finn onto a collapsible stretcher, Magnus stepped into the boy's line of sight. Finn's eyes fluttered open for a brief second, unfocused, glazed with pain and shock. He saw the towering, terrifying figure of the biker president looming over him. You hold the line, Finn. Magnus's deep voice was unexpectedly gentle. You fight to stay awake. You're under the wing now. Nobody touches you. They loaded Finn into the back of a blacked-out, customized Sprinter van. Medical equipment, oxygen, a stretcher secured to the floor. Cass climbed in right behind him, refusing to let Doc treat her own gunshot wound until Finn was stabilized. The van's doors slammed shut. Engine roared to life. It sped off into the night, cutting through the rain, escorted by a phalanx of motorcycles. Magnus swung his leg over his road glide, fired the engine. The thunderous roar echoed off the brick walls of the Iron Horse Roadhouse. Behind him, 800 engines roared to life in perfect synchronized unison. The ground shook violently, windows rattled, car alarms triggered. The sound was biblical, apocalyptic, the mechanical heartbeat of an army marching to war. They pulled out onto the wet streets of Bakersfield in formation. Organized, disciplined, deadly. They were no longer just a motorcycle club. They were an army seeking blood for the woman who was nearly murdered and justice for the homeless ghost who had saved her. Warmth was the first thing Finn registered when consciousness slowly returned. Not cold, not rain, not the bone-deep ache of concrete against his spine. Warmth, real warmth, the kind that sank into your muscles and bones and told your body it was safe to stop fighting, safe to rest. He didn't open his eyes immediately. Couldn't. His eyelids felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds each. But even in the darkness behind his closed lids, he could feel it. Heat. Genuine heat radiating from somewhere above him, wrapping around him like a cocoon. The mattress beneath him was so thick and soft, he felt like he was floating. Clean cotton sheets wrapped around him, heavy and smooth. A blanket, an actual blanket. Not a torn jacket or newspapers or cardboard. Real fabric designed to keep a human being warm and comfortable. For 13 months, waking up had meant bracing for impact. The biting cold, the ache of hunger, the sharp kick of a security guard telling him to move along, the constant threat of violence from other street kids who saw weakness as opportunity. But this morning was different. This morning, Finn Mercer was warm and safe and alive. The smell hit him next. Strong coffee, frying bacon, something else underneath. Antiseptic, medical, clean. Slowly, memories began filtering through the fog in his brain. The parking lot, the rain, the woman with the briefcase, the suppressed gun, the tire iron, the sickening crack of bone, the brutal punch that had lifted him off his feet. Blood, so much blood. The motorcycles, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The ground shaking, the man with the braided blonde beard and those winter storm eyes. You're under the wing now. Panic seized Finn's chest. His eyes flew open. He tried to sit up, his body moving on instinct, on survival programming that said never stay still, never let your guard down, always be ready to run. Pain exploded through his rib cage like someone had shoved a hot knife between his bones. He gasped, the sound strangled and pathetic, and collapsed back onto the pillows. Easy, kid. Take it slow. You're taped up like a mummy. Finn turned his head, carefully, the movement sending fresh waves of pain through his skull. He was in a large room with wood panel walls. Vintage motorcycle parts hung like art. A framed photograph showed a group of men standing beside their bikes' vests, gleaming in the sun, all of them grinning at the camera. Another frame held a Hell's Angel's death's head rendered in intricate detail. Sitting in a chair beside the bed was Cassandra Blackwell. Her left arm was bound in a black sling held tight against her chest. But she looked fresh, clean. Her blonde hair was washed and hung loose around her shoulders. She wore a simple black t-shirt and jeans. No armor, no battle gear, just a woman sitting beside a bed holding a mug of coffee, watching him with warm, concerned eyes. Where am I? Finn's throat felt like sandpaper. The words came out as a rasp. You're at the compound. Cass set her mug down and handed him a glass of water with a plastic straw. The Bakersfield Charter Clubhouse. Safest place on earth for you right now. Finn drank greedily. The cool water soothed his throat, washed away some of the cotton-mouth fog. He tried to piece together how he'd gotten here. The van, the medical equipment, hands working on him, voices, darkness. The men in the car, they're no longer a concern. The voice came from the doorway. Deep, resonant. The kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to command attention. Magnus Blackwell stepped into the room. He filled the doorway completely. 6'5" of muscle and scar tissue and absolute authority. He still wore his vest, the president patch over his heart, the death's head on his back. His blonde beard was still braided, his gaze fixed on Finn with an intensity that made the boy want to shrink into the mattress. Magnus walked to the foot of the bed, crossing his massive tattooed arms. He looked utterly exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. But there was something else in his features, something that might have been satisfaction, maybe even pride. The men in the car belonged to a crew out of Vegas, trying to muscle in on our territory. They won't be trying again. Magnus glanced at Cass. A silent communication passed between them. Years of marriage compressed into a single look. It turns out we had a leak in our own house. A man I trusted for a decade sold my wife out to the highest bidder. Because of that betrayal, Cass was supposed to die last night. Magnus's tone hardened, became colder, more dangerous. The only reason I am not burying my wife today is because a 17-year-old kid with nothing to his name decided to pick up a piece of scrap metal and go to war against professional killers. Finn swallowed hard. The weight of Magnus Blackwell's scrutiny felt like a physical pressure on his chest. I couldn't just watch. I couldn't. The words came out small, inadequate. Magnus slowly nodded. Something in his weathered, hard face softened. Not much, but enough. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, stepped around the bed and held it out. It was a pin, small, enamel, red and white, the number 81. In our world, loyalty and courage are the only currencies that matter. You don't wear the patch, Finn, but as of last night you bled for it. You bled for my family. Magnus set the pin on the bedside table. Then he reached into his other pocket and tossed something onto the blanket covering Finn's legs. A heavy ring of keys jangled against each other. There's a garage apartment above the club's custom shop on the south side of town. It's warm, it's stocked with food. And it belongs to you now. Finn stared at the keys like they were alien artifacts. His brain couldn't process what was happening. When you're healed up, you start an apprenticeship under our lead mechanic. You're going to learn how to build engines. You're going to earn a real wage. You are never sleeping on concrete again. Magnus leaned forward slightly. His voice dropped lower, more intimate, more fierce. You are under the protection of the Hell's Angels. Anyone who looks at you wrong answers to me. Tears hot and unbidden welled up in Finn's eyes. He tried to blink them back. Failed. They spilled down his cheeks, cutting warm tracks through the bruises and scars. For 13 months he had been invisible, entirely alone in a cruel world that had chewed him up and spat him out, a ghost drifting through a reality that had no place for broken boys. Now looking at the fierce protective faces of Magnus and Cass, he realized something fundamental had shifted. His days as a ghost were over. Thank you. The words choked out of him, his voice cracking. I don't know what to say. You don't say anything. Cass smiled gently, brushing hair away from the bandage on his forehead. You just get better. Magnus straightened up, looked at Cass, then back at Finn. Can you walk? I think so. Finn grimaced as he carefully pushed himself out of the bed. His ribs screamed in protest. His head swam with dizziness. But Cass immediately moved to support his left side while Magnus hovered close, ready to catch him if he fell. Come here. I want to show you something. Magnus guided Finn slowly out of the bedroom and down a long, wood-paneled hallway. They passed doors, offices, a chapel with rows of wooden benches. The walls were covered with photographs, decades of history, men on bikes, brotherhood frozen in time. They reached a set of heavy double doors that opened onto a second-story iron balcony overlooking a massive courtyard. Magnus pushed the doors open. The cold morning air hit Finn's face, but he didn't shiver. He just stared in complete awe. The vast fortified courtyard of the compound was packed, shoulder to shoulder with men. Hundreds of Hell's Angels, not just from Bakersfield, but from charters across the state. Oakland, San Bernardino, Fresno, Sacramento. Their motorcycles were parked in perfect gleaming rows, chrome and steel catching the weak November sunlight breaking through the clouds. When Magnus, Cass, and the battered, bruised teenager stepped onto the balcony, the entire courtyard fell utterly silent. Hundreds of hardened outlaws looked up at the boy who had saved their president's wife. Then one man stepped forward from the front of the crowd. Axel, the sergeant-at-arms, scarred face, absolute loyalty. Axel didn't speak, didn't cheer, didn't raise his fist. Instead, he reached down and cranked the throttle of his Harley. The engine exploded with a deafening percussive roar that physically hit Finn in the chest like a shockwave. A second later, the man next to Axel did the same. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the air was entirely consumed by the thunderous ground-shaking roar of 800 heavy V-twin engines revving to the red line in a synchronized mechanical symphony of absolute respect. The sound was biblical, primal, the collective heartbeat of a family welcoming one of their own. Finn stood on the balcony, flanked by Magnus and Cass, looking out over his new family. He felt the heavy vibrations of the engines deep in his chest, resonating through his broken ribs and into his tired soul. For the first time in his life, Finn Mercer wasn't running. He was home. The engines eventually quieted. The men dispersed back to their charters, their territories, their lives. But the memory of that sound, that raw display of acceptance, stayed with Finn like a brand burned into his heart. Doc Rafferty kept him at the compound for 3 more days, monitoring, making sure the concussion wasn't going to cause complications, making sure the broken ribs were healing clean, making sure malnutrition hadn't done permanent damage to his organs or bones. On the 4th day, Magnus came to him with a different kind of question. "Tell me about your parents, Finn." They were sitting in what the club called the war room, a large space with a heavy oak table chairs, maps on the walls. This was where decisions got made, where strategy was planned, where the brotherhood gathered to solve problems. Just the two of them now. Magnus on one side of the table, Finn on the other. Finn hesitated. This wasn't information he shared easily. Wasn't information anyone had cared about for 13 months. My mom died 6 years ago, domestic violence. Her boyfriend beat her to death while I hid in a closet. The words came out flat, clinical, like he was reading from a police report instead of describing the worst night of his life. I called 911, but he ripped the phone out of the wall. I ran. She told me to run. When I came back, she was gone. Magnus listened without interruption. His winter blue eyes never left Finn's face. "Your father never knew him. Mom said he was a good man who died before I was born. She never talked about him much. Just said he rode with lions and that he would have loved me." Magnus's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his gaze. Recognition. Calculation. "Your mother's named Claire. Claire Mercer. And you've been on your own since then, foster care. 3 different homes. Last one was in Reno, man named Lloyd Perkins. He believed in discipline. Hard discipline." Finn touched his ribs unconsciously. Old bruises, old pain layered over new. "I left 13 months ago, stole $40 and hitchhiked to Bakersfield. Been invisible ever since." Magnus leaned back in his chair. The wood creaked under his weight. He studied Finn with an intensity that made the boy feel like he was being dissected. Not in a cruel way, more like Magnus was looking for something specific, some answer to a question he hadn't asked yet. "You didn't freeze last night, Finn. You were starving, sick, weak. But when it mattered, you attacked. Most men would have run, some would have watched. You attacked. Why? Because I didn't save my mom." The answer came out before Finn could stop it. Raw, honest, the core wound exposed. "She died because I was too small, too weak, too scared. I've lived with that for 6 years. I couldn't watch another woman die. Not if there was something I could do, even if it killed me." Magnus nodded slowly, like Finn had just confirmed something important. That kind of courage, Finn, that's not learned. It's not trained into you. It just is. You either have it or you don't, and you have it. Magnus stood up, walked to a file cabinet in the corner, pulled out a folder, set it on the table between them. "I'm not a man who believes in coincidence, and I'm not a man who ignores signs when they're put in front of me. You're here for a reason. The universe put you in that parking lot for a reason." He opened the folder. Inside were photographs, documents, papers Finn couldn't quite make out. "Your mother wanted out of club life, wanted safety for you." I respect that. She made her choice, but you're not a child anymore. You made your own choice, and your choice brought you back to where you belong. Finn stared at the documents, but the words were swimming. His head was still foggy from the concussion, from the pain medication, from the sheer overwhelming reality of the past 4 days. I don't understand. You will, when you're ready. For now, just know this. You're not alone anymore. You're not invisible. You're seen, and you're protected. Magnus closed the folder, put it away. Now come on. There's someone I want you to meet. They walked through the compound grounds. The place was massive. A fortress, high walls, security cameras, guard posts. But inside those walls, it felt like something else. A village, a community. Men nodded at Magnus as they passed, respectful, deferential, but their gazes went to Finn with something different. Curiosity, respect, recognition. The kid who saved Cass had become legend overnight. Magnus led him to a large building at the far end of the compound, the custom motorcycle shop. The doors were wide open. Inside, the air smelled like motor oil and metal and welding smoke, the scent of work, of creation, of purpose. The space was huge, 10 bikes in various states of assembly, tools hanging on pegboards, a lift in the corner with a Harley suspended in the air, its engine exposed like open heart surgery, and standing beside a workbench holding a socket wrench was a man who looked like he'd been carved from old leather and scar tissue. Wrench. That's what everyone called him. His real name was probably something else, but no one remembered anymore. He was in his mid-60s, Scottish heritage, thick gray hair pulled back in a ponytail, arms covered in faded tattoos, a permanent scowl etched into his weathered face. He looked up when Magnus and Finn entered, squinted at the boy. This the kid. This is Finn. Finn, this is Wrench, best mechanic west of the Mississippi. He built my road glide from the frame up. If it has an engine, Wrench can make it sing. Wrench grunted, set down his tool, wiped his hands on a rag that was probably dirtier than his hands. You know, bikes, kid. No, sir, but I learned fast. I want to learn. Wrench studied him for a long moment, taking in the bruises, the bandages, the way Finn stood like he was ready to bolt at any second despite the obvious pain it would cause. Can't teach someone who don't want to learn. But if you want it, I can teach you everything. He gestured at the workbench. Hand me that torque wrench. The one with the red handle. Finn looked at the array of tools hanging on the pegboard. His eyes scanned the shapes, the sizes. Something in his brain just clicked. Pattern recognition, spatial reasoning. Whatever it was, he grabbed the correct tool on the first try. Wrench raised an eyebrow. All right, now hand me a 3/8 drive socket, 10 millimeter. Again, Finn's eyes found it, grabbed it, handed it over without hesitation. Wrench took it, looked at Magnus. Something passed between the two men. A silent communication. Kid's got hands, good hands, natural hands. Wrench turned back to Finn. You ever taken anything apart? I'd ever fixed something. I used to fix my mom's toaster and her radio. She couldn't afford to buy new ones, so I'd take them apart and figure out what was broken. Wrench grunted again, but this time there was something that might have been approval in his eyes. All right, kid, you heal up. Then you come back here. We'll start with the basics. Oil changes, brake pads, work your way up to engines. You pay attention, work hard, don't bullshit me, and I'll teach you everything I know. Finn felt something unfamiliar blooming in his chest. Hope, purpose, the sense that maybe, just maybe, he had something to offer the world beyond just surviving it. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I'm a hard teacher. You'll be sore frustrated and covered in grease, but you'll learn. Magnus put a hand on Finn's shoulder, gentle despite its size. Go rest. Doc wants you taking it easy for another week. Then you start. As they walked back toward the main building, Finn felt lighter, like some weight he'd been carrying had been lifted. Not all of it. The guilt over his mother would probably never fully leave, but some of it, enough to breathe a little easier. They were halfway across the courtyard when Axel appeared, moving fast. His scarred face was hard, serious. We got him. Magnus stopped. His entire body language changed, from mentor to warlord in the space of a heartbeat. Where Motel 6 on Highway 99 got surveillance photos. He met with someone. Who? Axel handed Magnus a phone. On the screen was a photograph taken with a telephoto lens. A man sitting in a car, dark hair slicked back, expensive boots, talking to someone in the passenger seat. Garrett Sloan, the vice president. And the man he was talking to was someone Finn didn't recognize. But Magnus clearly did. His jaw tightened. His expression turned to winter. That's Dominic Vaughn, Vegas Syndicate. Magnus handed the phone back. His voice dropped to a lethal whisper. Bring him in. Quietly. Don't make a scene. Just bring him to church. Finn didn't fully understand what he was witnessing, but he understood enough. Someone had betrayed the club. Someone close. Someone trusted. And Magnus Blackwell was about to deliver justice. Church in the Hells Angels world meant the chapel, the sacred space where only patched members were allowed, where votes were taken, where decisions that affected the entire club were made. Finn wasn't allowed inside, but he watched from the hallway through a small window in the door as 24 senior members filed in. Grim, silent. This wasn't a normal meeting. This was a trial. Garrett Sloan was brought in by Axel and 3 other massive angels. His hands weren't bound, but he knew. You could see it in his face. The panic, the desperation, the knowledge that his life was about to change forever. Magnus sat at the head of the table. President, judge, executioner. Garrett tried to speak. Magnus held up one hand. Silence. Axel laid out the evidence. Phone records, wire transfers, security footage, bank statements showing $500,000 appearing in an offshore account under Garrett's name 2 days before the attack on Cass. The money had come from Vegas, from Dominic Vaughn. Payment for information, payment for access, payment for betrayal. Garrett's defense crumbled fast. He tried to justify it, tried to claim the club was going soft. That legitimacy was killing what they were, that he was trying to preserve the outlaw spirit. Magnus listened without expression. When Garrett finally ran out of words, Magnus spoke. You sold out my wife for money. You put a target on her back. You gave professional killers her location, her route, her timing. You did that. His voice was quiet, controlled, which made it more terrifying than if he'd shouted. We're not criminals pretending to be a club, Garrett. We're a brotherhood first. Honor first. Loyalty first. You broke that. You broke US. The vote was called, unanimous. Not a single hand raised in Garrett's defense. Excommunication. Immediate, total. They stripped his patches, cut them off his vest with knives right there in the chapel. The leather fell to the floor like dead skin. Garrett's face went pale. This was worse than death in his world. To be excommunicated, to be erased from the brotherhood. But Magnus wasn't done. You're lucky Cass is alive. If she died, you'd be in the ground right now. But she's alive because of a starving kid with more courage in his little finger than you have in your entire body. Magnus leaned forward. We're gonna beat you. Not to death, just enough that you'll remember. Then we're going to drive you to the edge of Vegas territory and dump you. You can explain to Vaughn why his money bought him nothing but failure. Garrett was dragged out of the chapel. Finn stepped back from the window. He didn't need to see what came next. Didn't want to. This was club business. Dark justice. An hour later, a black van pulled out of the compound. Garrett Sloan was in the back. Beaten, broken, branded with the mark of traitor across his chest. He would be deposited at the edge of Vegas territory with a message. A warning to anyone else who thought they could buy their way into Hell's Angels business. Cass found Finn sitting on the steps outside the main building. She sat down beside him, wincing slightly as her injured shoulder protested the movement. You okay? I don't know. Finn looked at his hands. I've never seen justice like that before. That's because you've lived in a world where justice doesn't exist, where the strong prey on the weak and nobody does anything about it. This world is different. We take care of our own. We protect our family. And when someone breaks that trust, there are consequences. She put her good arm around his shoulders. You saved my life, Finn. That makes you family. And family protects family. Always. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun set over the compound walls, watching the world turn from day to night. Somewhere in the distance, Finn heard the rumble of motorcycles. Not the 800 from that first night, just a few, coming and going, the normal rhythm of club life. He thought about the keys in his pocket, the apartment waiting for him, the apprenticeship with Wrench, the future stretching out in front of him like a road he'd never dared to imagine. For 13 months, he'd been a ghost, invisible, alone, dying slowly on the streets. Now he had a name, Finn Mercer, and soon maybe Finn Blackwell. He had a family, found not born, chosen not given. He had a purpose to learn, to grow, to become something more than just a survivor. And he had protection. The weight of 800 men willing to go to war for him. The radio on Axel's belt crackled. Finn heard fragments of conversation, something about movement, Vegas crew, vehicles heading toward Bakersfield. Axel's face hardened. He keyed the radio. How many? 25, maybe 30. Armed, Axel looked at Magnus. Magnus looked at the setting sun. They're coming for blood. Then we give them blood. Magnus stood. His voice carried across the courtyard. Lock it down. Full defense. Everyone to stations. Men moved with practiced efficiency. No panic, no chaos, just smooth, coordinated response. They'd done this before. Cass stood up, looked at Finn. Come on, we're getting you somewhere safe. But Finn thought about the past 4 days, thought about the warmth, the food, the family, the acceptance, thought about finally being seen. I want to help. Cass looked at him, really looked at him, saw the determination in his bruised face. Then stay close to me. Do exactly what I say, and don't try to be a hero again. Once was enough, but they both knew that if it came down to it, if someone he cared about was in danger, Finn Mercer would pick up whatever weapon he could find and go to war, because that's who he was now. Not a ghost, not invisible, a lion. 3 in the morning was when the world belonged to the predators. Darkness, silence. The vulnerable hours when most people were deep in sleep, their defenses down, their guards lowered. Professional killers knew this. They planned for it, exploited it. Dominic Vaughn knew this better than most. He'd spent 20 years as a private military contractor. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, places where the rules of engagement were suggestions at best and bloodshed was currency. Now he worked for the Vegas syndicate, running their muscle, their enforcer, the man they called when violence needed to be precise, efficient, and absolutely final. 25 men, all professionals, all armed, all willing to do whatever it took to send a message to Magnus Blackwell in the Bakersfield Hells Angels. You don't humiliate the Vegas syndicate. You don't return their money in the form of a beaten, branded rat. You don't get away with that. The convoy approached the compound in darkness, headlights off, engines quiet, moving like shadows through the streets of Bakersfield. But Magnus Blackwell hadn't survived 30 years in the outlaw world by being careless. The compound's security system was military grade. Cameras, motion sensors, infrared detection. Guard posts manned 24 hours a day. The Hells Angels might be transitioning toward legitimacy, but they still knew how to defend their home. The alert went out 60 seconds before the Vegas convoy reached the outer perimeter. Vehicles approaching, multiple hostiles, armed. Inside the compound, men moved with the smooth efficiency of a well-drilled unit. This wasn't their first siege, wouldn't be their last. They knew their positions, knew their roles, knew what needed to be done. Magnus stood in the center of the courtyard vest over a tactical plate carrier, a Remington 870 shotgun in his hands. His winter blue gaze was completely calm. This was what he was built for. This was where he thrived. 80 Hells Angels against 25 Vegas mercenaries. The math favored the home team. Finn had been moved to the war room with Cass and 3 other women who lived at the compound. Wives. Old ladies. The ones who weren't fighters but needed protection. Doc Rafferty was there too, setting up a makeshift triage station. Clean sheets, medical supplies, tourniquets, morphine. He was preparing for casualties. Cass sat at the table, her injured arm still in a sling, but her good hand holding a compact Glock. She wasn't hiding, wasn't cowering. She was ready. If anyone made it through the defenders outside, they'd have to go through her first. Finn stood by the window watching the courtyard. His ribs still ached, his head still throbbed, but adrenaline was a hell of a painkiller. You should be resting. Cass's voice was gentle but firm. I can't just hide while people fight for me. You're not hiding. You're staying alive. That's what Magnus wants. That's what I want. Before Finn could respond, the first explosion tore through the night. The outer gate. Breached. Not with a vehicle, with precisely placed demolition charges. The kind you didn't buy at a hardware store. Military grade. Professional. The blast echoed across the compound like thunder. Then came the sound of automatic weapons fire. Not the single shots of pistols or hunting rifles. The sustained bursts of military-grade assault weapons. Vegas had come prepared for war. Magnus's voice cut through the chaos on the radio network. Hold the line. Controlled fire. Do not waste ammunition. Wait for clean shots. The Angels were dug in. Defensive positions behind concrete barriers, behind vehicles, behind the heavy brick walls of buildings. They had the advantage of cover, of knowing the terrain, of fighting for their home. The Vegas mercenaries poured through the breached gate like a dark tide. Tactical gear, night vision, moving in formation, professional, deadly. But they weren't fighting civilians. They were fighting men who had spent decades learning violence, who had survived gang wars, turf battles, and law enforcement crackdowns, who knew that sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to be willing to kill for it. The firefight was brutal, sustained, chaotic. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like lightning. Tracers cut red lines through the air. The sound was deafening, overlapping, a sustained roar that made it impossible to think, only react. Finn watched from the window, his heart hammering. He saw Axel behind a concrete barrier, firing controlled bursts from an AR-15. Saw Wrench, the old mechanic, calmly working a bolt-action rifle like he was back on a range. Saw men he'd only met in passing standing their ground, defending their home with everything they had. And he saw Magnus, standing in the center of the storm, not hiding, not taking cover, just standing there with his shotgun firing, racking, firing again, daring anyone to come at him, the president, the warlord, the immovable object. 3 Vegas mercenaries made the mistake of charging his position. Magnus dropped all 3 with 4 shots. Methodical, efficient, terrifying. But the Vegas crew had numbers, and they had a plan. While the main force engaged the Angels at the front, a smaller team of 5 men peeled off, moving along the eastern wall, away from the main battle, flanking. Finn saw it happen, saw the break in the pattern. His eyes tracked the movement. For 13 months, survival had depended on noticing things other people missed, reading patterns, seeing the anomaly, the threat. His brain, trained by necessity to map his environment, suddenly clicked into gear. He knew this compound, not from living here for 4 days, but from watching it for 4 months from the outside, from memorizing every entrance, every exit, every blind spot, every weakness, because that's what ghosts did. They watched, they learned, they survived. Cass, his voice was urgent. Cass looked up from her position by the door. 5 men, east wall, they're flanking. How do you know? I watched this place for months. There's a drainage tunnel behind the machine shop. It comes out inside the compound. If they find it, they'll be inside. Cass grabbed the radio. Magnus, Finn says 5 hostiles flanking east wall. Drainage tunnel behind the machine shop. Magnus's voice came back immediately. Axel, take 10 men. East wall, now. Axel and 10 angels disengaged from the main battle and sprinted toward the eastern perimeter. They reached the machine shop just as the 5 Vegas mercenaries emerged from the drainage tunnel. Caught them in the open. No cover, no advantage. The firefight lasted 15 seconds. When it was over, all 5 Vegas men were down. The angels had stopped the flanking maneuver before it could succeed because a 17-year-old kid had watched, had learned, had remembered. Magnus's voice on the radio. Good call, Finn. The main assault was faltering. The Vegas crew had expected surprise, expected to overwhelm the compound with superior firepower and tactical training. They hadn't expected organized resistance, hadn't expected men who fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to protect. Dominic Vaughn, watching from a position outside the compound, realized his plan was collapsing. He'd lost 5 men to the flanking ambush, lost another 8 to the main assault. His remaining 12 men were pinned down, taking casualties, making no progress. This was supposed to be a surgical strike. In and out. Send a message. Retrieve the briefcase with the financial documents if possible. Kill Magnus Blackwell if the opportunity presented itself. Instead, it was turning into a massacre. Vaughn made a decision, the kind of decision that separated professionals from amateurs. When a mission goes sideways, you adapt. You improvise. You go for the secondary objective. He couldn't get Magnus. The man was in the center of the courtyard surrounded by his army, untouchable. But Cassandra Blackwell was in the war room, the building on the north side, away from the main battle, lightly defended. If Vaughn couldn't kill Magnus, he could kill Magnus's wife, and that would hurt worse than any bullet. He moved alone, one man, quiet, professional. Using the chaos of the main battle as cover, he scaled the north wall, dropped into the compound, and moved through the shadows like smoke. The war room was on the second floor. Vaughn knew the layout, had studied blueprints purchased from a bribed city official. He entered through a side door that had been left unlocked in the chaos, moved up the stairs, silent, a ghost with a gun. The hallway was empty. Everyone was either fighting at the front or hunkered down in the war room. Vaughn approached the door, heard voices inside, female, male, the sound of someone organizing medical supplies. He checked his weapon. Suppressed Sig Sauer P226, 15 rounds, more than enough. His hand reached for the door handle. A voice behind him. Hey. Vaughn spun weapon coming up. Finn Mercer stood at the end of the hallway. He'd left the war room through a back exit. Something in his gut had told him to check the hallways. The same survival instinct that had kept him alive for 13 months. He had no gun, no knife, no training. But he had a fire extinguisher he'd grabbed from the wall bracket. Vaughn aimed. Center mass. Professional shot. No hesitation. Finn pulled the pin and sprayed. The white foam exploded from the nozzle, filling the narrow hallway with a blinding cloud. Vaughn's shot went wide, punching through drywall. He cursed, trying to clear his vision. Finn charged through the foam like a linebacker. He swung the heavy steel fire extinguisher with both hands. Connected with Vaughn's gun arm, the weapon clattered to the floor. But Vaughn was a professional, trained in hand-to-hand combat by the best militaries in the world. He recovered instantly, slammed a fist into Finn's ribs. The broken ribs, the one still healing. Finn gasped, the pain blinding. His legs buckled. Vaughn grabbed him by the throat, lifted him off the ground, and slammed him against the wall. "You little shit! You've been a problem since day one." Vaughn's hand found the backup pistol on his ankle holster. Drew it, pressed the barrel against Finn's forehead. "Should have stayed invisible, kid." "Let him go." Magnus Blackwell stood at the top of the stairs. His shotgun was gone. He'd emptied it in the courtyard, but he had a pistol in his hand. A big one. Looked like a .45. Vaughn kept the gun against Finn's head. "Use the boy as a shield. Drop it, Blackwell, or the kid's brain decorates this wall." Magnus didn't drop the weapon. Didn't lower it. His winter storm gaze locked onto Vaughn's face. "Your fight's with me, Vaughn, not with him. The boy ruined everything. Your wife should be dead. My client should have those documents. Instead, I've got a dozen men dead in a mission that's completely fucked. All because this homeless piece of shit decided to play hero." Vaughn's finger tightened on the trigger. A gunshot cracked through the hallway. Sharp, loud, but it didn't come from Vaughn's weapon. Cassandra Blackwell stood in the doorway of the war room, her injured arm still in a sling, but her good arm holding her Glock steady. She'd shot Dominic Vaughn twice in the back. Center mass. Professional grouping. Vaughn dropped. The gun fell from his hand. Finn collapsed to the floor, gasping, coughing, his throat bruised where Vaughn had choked him. Cass walked forward, stood over Vaughn's body, made sure he was down, made sure he wasn't getting back up. Then she looked at Finn. "Twice. You've saved me twice now." Magnus helped Finn to his feet. The boy was shaking, adrenaline crash, pain, shock, all of it hitting at once. "You did good, kid. Real good." Outside, the sound of gunfire was dying down. The Vegas assault was breaking. The remaining mercenaries were retreating, dragging their wounded, leaving their dead. They'd lost. Completely. Decisively. The Hells Angels had defended their home. As dawn broke over Bakersfield, the compound looked like a war zone. Bullet holes in walls, shattered windows, blood on concrete. 3 angels wounded, none critically. Doc Rafferty worked on them with steady hands while others swept the perimeter, securing the scene. 12 Vegas mercenaries dead, another 8 captured. The rest had fled back across state lines, carrying the message that Hells Angels territory was not to be trifled with. Dominic Vaughn's body was removed from the compound. It would be delivered to Vegas with a message. Simple, direct, final. Stay out of Bakersfield. Finn sat on the steps outside the war room, the same steps where he'd sat with Cassius just hours before. Doc Rafferty had checked him over. Bruised throat, reopened stitches on his forehead, but nothing that wouldn't heal. Magnus sat down beside him. They watched the sun rise together in silence for a long moment. "You could have died tonight, I know. Why'd you leave the safe room? Because hiding didn't feel right. Because I saw the threat. Because I couldn't just let him hurt Cass." Magnus nodded slowly. "You've got the heart, Finn, the courage. But you need training, need to learn how to fight proper, how to defend yourself and others. I'll learn whatever you teach me." "Good, because I'm not losing you now that I found you." Finn looked at Magnus, really looked at him. This massive, terrifying, gentle man who had taken him in, who had given him protection, purpose, family. Why do all this for me? Because courage like yours is rare. Because loyalty matters. Because you're exactly the kind of man this club needs. Magnus put a heavy hand on Finn's shoulder. "And because Cass and I never had kids, tried for years, couldn't, stopped trying, made peace with it." He paused. "Then you showed up, starving, broken, invisible, and you went to war for my wife without hesitation, without thought for yourself. That's family, Finn. That's blood that matters, not the blood you're born with, the blood you're willing to spill for people who matter." Finn felt tears building again. He didn't fight them this time. "You're offering to be my family. I'm not offering. I'm telling you, you're ours if you want to be." 2 weeks passed. The compound was repaired. Security was upgraded. The wounded angels healed. The captured Vegas mercenaries were turned over to law enforcement with evidence of assault conspiracy and attempted murder. The Vegas syndicate, facing federal investigation, pulled back from California entirely. The war was over. Magnus and Cass filed paperwork, legal documents, adoption papers for a 17-year-old boy with no family and no future. Finn Mercer became Finn Blackwell. The courthouse ceremony was simple, quick, but profound. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd presided over countless adoptions, looked at Finn with kind eyes. "Son, do you accept Victor Magnus Blackwell and Cassandra Ann Blackwell as your legal parents?" Finn's voice didn't shake, didn't hesitate. "Yes. Yes, I do. And do you, Magnus and Cassandra Blackwell, accept this boy as your son with all the rights and responsibilities that entails?" Magnus and Cass answered together. "We do." The judge signed the papers, stamped them. "Official, congratulations. You're a family." Cass pulled Finn into a hug. Her injured arm was out of the sling, now healing well. She held him tight. "Your mama would be proud," she whispered. "And your papa, wherever he is, he's watching. He knows you're home." They celebrated with lunch at a small diner Magnus loved. Just the three of them. No club business, no vests, no armor, just a family learning how to be a family. Finn ordered a burger and fries and couldn't stop smiling when the food arrived. Hot, fresh, his. No one was going to take it away. No one was going to kick him out before he finished. That evening, Magnus called Finn into his office. Private, just the two of them. There's a tradition. When someone joins the family properly, the club needs to know. He handed Finn a vest. Not a full cut, not a patch, but a prospect rocker. The first step, Finn Blackwell. Prospect. You'll earn your patch in time. Learn the life. Prove yourself, but for now, this is yours. Finn held the vest like it was made of gold. This wasn't just clothing. This was identity, belonging, proof that he existed, proof that he mattered. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. There's one more thing." Magnus led him outside. The sun was setting, golden light washing over the compound. The courtyard appeared empty, quiet. They walked to the second-story balcony, the same one where Finn had stood 2 weeks ago while 800 engines roared in tribute. Magnus pushed open the doors. The courtyard wasn't empty anymore. 800 Hells Angels, maybe more. Every charter in California, Nevada, Arizona, Oregon, they'd come from hundreds of miles away, ridden for hours, left their territories and their responsibilities for this, for him. The bikes were parked in perfect rows. The men stood at attention, silent, waiting. Magnus stepped forward. His voice carried across the space without needing amplification. "That's what happened when 800 men gave you absolute silence. Brothers, friends, family. 2 weeks ago, we were attacked. Vegas thought they could take what was ours, thought they could hurt us, thought we'd roll over." He paused. "They were wrong," a rumble of agreement from the crowd. "They were wrong because we stand together, because we protect our own, because when you come for one of us, you come for all of us." Magnus pulled Finn forward, put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "This boy had nothing, owed us nothing. But when killers came for my wife, he picked up iron and went to war. He saved Cass, saved the club, saved everything." He paused again, let the words sink in. He didn't do it for reward, didn't do it for recognition. He did it because it was right, because he has something most people never find. True courage. Magnus's voice grew stronger. "Today we don't welcome a guest. We don't welcome charity. We welcome Finn Blackwell, my son, Cass's son, blood of our blood, family of our family." He looked down at Finn. "You're not invisible anymore, kid. You're seen, and you're home. Axel, standing at the front of the formation, stepped forward, reached down, cranked the throttle of his Harley. The engine exploded with that familiar bone-shaking roar. Then the man next to him, then the next, then the next. Row by row, section by section, 800V twin engines roaring to life in perfect sequence. The ground shook. The air vibrated. The sound was overwhelming, primal. The mechanical heartbeat of a family welcoming their newest member. And then as 1-800 fists rose into the air, not just revving, saluting. Finn stood on the balcony between Magnus and Cass. His parents, his family, tears streamed down his face, and he didn't care. Didn't try to hide them. For 13 months, he'd been a ghost. Invisible, alone, dying slowly on the streets while the world looked right through him. Now he stood in front of 800 men who saw him, who acknowledged him, who accepted him. He was Finn Blackwell. He was home. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. Finn stood in Wrench's shop grease under his fingernails, a socket wrench in his hand, working on a 1967 Harley Panhead that had been sitting in pieces for a decade. The engine was finally coming together. Piece by piece, a resurrection. He'd gained weight, 40 pounds of muscle. His face had filled out, color in his cheeks, strength in his shoulders. He looked healthy, alive. When he caught his reflection in the chrome, he sometimes didn't recognize himself. That was a good thing. The nightmares about his mother still came sometimes, but less often now. And when they did, he had Cass to talk to, a mother who understood trauma, who understood survival, who didn't judge him for his scars because she had her own. Magnus taught him to ride, to fight, to understand the codes that govern the brotherhood, honor, loyalty, the difference between violence that protected and violence that destroyed. He learned that strength wasn't about hurting people. It was about defending what mattered. Wrench taught him engines, transmissions, fuel systems, how to diagnose problems by sound alone, how to rebuild something broken into something beautiful. Every lesson was a metaphor Finn was learning to understand. The prospect vest hung on a hook by his workstation. He wore it with pride, earned it every day with hard work and dedication. He had an apartment above the shop, small but comfortable, his own space, his own sanctuary. No more cold, no more hunger, no more fear. Some nights he'd wake up in that warm bed and have to remind himself it was real, that he wasn't going to wake up behind a dumpster. He had a family, Magnus and Cass, Axel and Doc and Wrench and dozens of others who looked out for him, taught him, challenged him, loved him in the way men who'd lived hard lives knew how to love. The Panhead's engine turned over, smooth, perfect. Finn had rebuilt it from nothing, from scattered parts and broken dreams, just like he'd rebuilt himself. Wrench walked over, listened to the engine with the ear of a man who'd heard thousands, grunted, "Good work, kid, real good." From Wrench, that was high praise. Finn had learned that the old Scotsman didn't waste words. Magnus appeared in the doorway, leaned against the frame, watched his son work with quiet pride. "You got plans tonight, just working on this bike. Leave it. Come with me." They rode together through Bakersfield. 2 Harleys, father and son. The November air was cold, but Finn didn't mind. He had a good jacket now, warm, well-made, with his name on it, with a family name on it. They pulled up to a cemetery on the edge of town. Magnus led him through rows of headstones until they reached one specific grave. Claire Mercer, beloved mother. The headstone was new, clean, beautiful. Magnus had paid for it, had Claire's remains moved from the pauper's grave in Sacramento to a better place. Here, in Bakersfield, close to her son. "I come here sometimes," Magnus said quietly. "Tell her about you, about how you're doing. You do. She deserves to know her boy is safe, thriving, loved." Finn knelt by the grave, touched the cold stone with fingers that were no longer skeletal, no longer desperate. Hi, Mom. I'm okay now. I'm really okay. I found a family, found a home, found a purpose. Tears came, but they didn't hurt anymore. They were clean, healing. I'm sorry I couldn't save you, but I saved someone else. And maybe that matters. Maybe that's enough. Maybe you'd tell me it's enough. Magnus put his hand on Finn's shoulder, squeezed gently. She'd be proud, son. So damn proud. They stood there together as the sun set, father and son, speaking to the ghost of the woman who had started this story by loving a boy enough to tell him to run, to survive, to live. That night, back at the compound, Finn sat on the steps outside the main building. The same steps where this had all begun, where he'd sat with Cass after the battle, where he'd learned what family meant. The wood was familiar now. Home. The stars were out, bright, clear. The city lights of Bakersfield couldn't quite wash them away. Cass sat down beside him, handed him a mug of hot chocolate, his favorite. She'd learned that about him. The small things, the details that made him feel seen. Marshmallows on top, just melting. You thinking about something, just remembering. The cold, the hunger, the fear, but also the moment he'd made the choice to stop being invisible, to pick up that tire iron, to go to war, the moment everything changed. Would you do it again if you could go back? Finn thought about it, really thought about it, took a sip of the hot chocolate, felt the warmth spread through him. Every time, I do it every time, because that's who you are. That's who I became. Cass smiled, kissed the top of his head like mothers do. That's who you always were, Finn. You just needed someone to see it. You just needed to see it yourself. 800 miles away in Las Vegas, the syndicate was rebuilding, licking their wounds, learning their lesson. The survivors told the story in quiet rooms about the kid who shouldn't have mattered, about the mistake of underestimating the angels, about the price of betrayal. You don't mess with the Hell's Angels. You don't mess with family. And you definitely don't mess with a homeless boy who finds his courage in a parking lot on a rainy night and decides that some things are worth fighting for. Finn Mercer had been invisible. Finn Blackwell was a lion, and lions don't hide. They don't run. They don't disappear into shadows hoping the world will ignore them. They stand. They fight. They roar. And when the world finally sees them, it remembers.